As the war with Iran moves into its fourth week, President Trump is saying a deal to end the war is possible. Trump had threatened to destroy Iran's power plants if it does not reopen the critical Strait of Hormuz. He's now delayed that deadline by 5 days. Late today, a senior Iranian official told CBS News exclusively it has received points from the U.S. through mediators, and they are being reviewed. So for more on these developments, I'm joined by Clay Seigle, Senior Fellow for Energy Security at the Center for International and Strategic Studies. Clay, thanks for joining us. Let's get right to it. President Trump says he's optimistic about talks with Iran, even if the war ends soon. How severe, though, is the impact going forward?
Hey, Juliet. Well, there will be a lag effect between whenever this conflict comes to an end and those energy exports resume from the Mideast Gulf, and when physical oil prices can start to return more toward normal levels. Remember, even though in the futures market, oil prices came a bit lower today on news of maybe negotiations, in the physical market, where people are really buying and selling barrels of oil, gasoline, jet fuel, it's still very high, very much over $100 a barrel. So we've spent the last few weeks running a deficit of supply relative to what had been expected, and it's going to take a while for those supplies to build back through the system.
Yeah, and until that builds back up through the system, what happens to inflation, airline travel, consumer spending if oil hits extreme levels?
Well, of course, it all depends on the definition of extreme. We've seen the highest nominal price for West Texas Intermediate, which is the United States benchmark crude oil. Back in 2008, it reached an all-time high around $147 per barrel. It didn't quite get that high during the most recent spike in 2022. But the point is that in inflation-adjusted terms, that's closer to $200 in 2026 terms. So if we don't get a resolution to this conflict soon, and we continue to lose big amounts of supply, it's 15 plus million barrels per day of oil from the Gulf that the world is not getting, then I think we could move to kind of the last line of defense to rebalance markets, which unfortunately is when prices get to those high levels that cause people to pull back on spending. So that could be anywhere between $150 and $200 a barrel. That translates to more than $5 a gallon of gasoline. I know that it's already higher than that in many states, but for the national average price of gasoline, the most recent high was $5 back in 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. On the West Coast, it's even over $6 right now. Where would you say we are at the stage right now? Are we at a critical stage?
Well, we're moving in that direction. If we've lost about 15 million barrels per day and it ends after, let's say, only a month, so 30 days, that's almost 500 million barrels of oil where we have been digging a hole in supply. And that manifests the fastest in the areas that are most dependent on that supply. And it's going to start to run out after about 4 weeks, which is the travel time from the Mideast Gulf to the key markets in Asia, China, Japan, Korea. And once those guys don't have the supply coming from the region, they're going to have to start drawing down inventories. That tightens balances, and that moves us into that kind of severe situation.
How confident are you about the president's ultimatum for Iran?
I think it's too early to say. I think on the glass half full interpretation of what's happened in the last few days, maybe there's recognition that this energy crisis is going to proliferate through the economy. And even here in the United States, even though we produce a lot more than we did back in the 70s, when there's a disruption anywhere, it affects prices everywhere. So I'm hopeful that policymakers see that we need to find an exit ramp to this crisis, and we need to get those exports flowing from the Gulf again. But the proof, of course, is always in the results, and we'll see by the end of this week, when the current deadline expires, if those talks have already begun or not. That's the main thing I'm watching for.
Absolutely. Appreciate your information, Clay. Thank you so much.